Welcome to Sayers and Secrets. A midnight howl shatters the night, carrying with it echoes of a crime cloaked in shadow. Nero Wolfe must follow the sound to its hidden meaning. Take a moment before we begin. Mysteries reward those who notice what others overlook. Where in the world are you joining us from? If mysteries cloaked in shadow intrigue you, like this video and subscribe to join the investigation. Now, light a candle, settle in, and let the mystery begin. The brownstone's doorbell rang at 9 sharp, and that was a crime in itself. Wolfe doesn't consider civilization properly awake until 11, and the sound of that chime before his second beer is as welcome as a subpoena. I went down the hall and opened the door to a woman who looked like she'd spent the night arguing with ghosts. Late 30s, hat tilted a little too far, gloves balled in her fist, eyes sharp but desperate. Before I could get out my standard, "Are you selling encyclopedias?" she said, "My husband is missing. And the dog that howled at midnight knows why." Now, I've heard some opening lines in my day, but that one deserved a bow. "Come in," I told her. "You've earned yourself an audience." I led her into the office, and she perched on the edge of the red leather chair as if she thought it might collapse under the weight of what she had to say. I was about to ask her name when I noticed Fritz standing frozen in the doorway, face the color of wallpaper paste. "Archie," he whispered, "the sausages. They are gone." Timing is a comedian's trick, but apparently it's also Fritz Brenner's curse. Here I was with a distressed lady and a missing husband, and Fritz was reporting a vanished breakfast. "Fritz," I said, "let me prioritize. Missing husband, missing sausages. One of these sounds more urgent, unless Wolfe has already discovered the plate." He winced. "He is coming." That was my cue. The elevator creaked, groaned, and produced 280 pounds of detective in a brown silk dressing gown. Wolfe entered, surveyed the room, and saw the tray on the stand. Eggs, toast, butter, no sausages. His lips compressed. "Sausages," he said, like a priest naming a heresy. Fritz folded his hands like he was awaiting last rites. "They are misplaced." "Misplaced?" Wolfe's eyebrows gathered for a lynching. I gave him the facts. "Seems your breakfast centerpiece has vanished from the icebox. No ransom note yet. Fritz is rattled, but our guest has something that might compete for your attention." Wolfe finally looked at her. "Madam, identify yourself." "I'm Mrs. Howard Ashby," she said, her voice quivering but clear, "and I beg you to listen. My husband is missing. He left his office last night at 9:30. He should have been home by 11. He never arrived. His car is gone." There has been no word. Wolfe leaned back, eyelids heavy, but his fingers tapped on the chair arm. "And the dog?" "It belongs to our neighbor, Mr. Koppler, a German shepherd. Last night it howled without pause, between midnight and 1. That dog has never howled before. This morning, Howard was gone. I am convinced the two are connected." I whistled softly. "You're saying a dog sang the midnight blues and now your husband's missing. With respect, Mrs. Ashby, that sounds more like a seance than a case." Her eyes locked on mine, suddenly sharp. "Howard has enemies, Mr. Goodwin. Quiet enemies. If I go to the police, it will be in the papers. I cannot allow that. But Mr. Wolfe, he understands patterns. He will see what the police cannot." Wolfe sighed, which in his language meant, "The hook is set." He gestured. "Proceed, Archie." "Get the particulars, so I did. Howard Ashby, 41. Accountant, cautious as a banker and regular as a metronome. Married 12 years, no children. No health problems, no gambling debts, no fondness for disappearing acts." Mrs. Ashby was calm enough to answer, though her gloves suffered from her twisting them. When I asked about the enemies, she hesitated. Then, Howard handled accounts for several clients. He discovered irregularities. Embezzlement, perhaps. He never told me details, only that he had made certain men resentful. That word hung in the air like the smell of onions. Wolfe grunted. Names? I don't know them, she admitted, but I can get them from his office files. That was promising. Files are my favorite kind of evidence. They don't argue back. Wolfe closed his eyes. Very well. I will consider. Archie will accompany you later to examine the files. For now, I must endure this calamitous morning calamitous, Mrs. Ashby repeated. I grinned. Don't mind him. He's referring to his breakfast. Your case, believe it or not, is slightly behind pork sausages on the Richter scale of catastrophe. Her lips twitched, almost a smile. But Wolfe wasn't smiling. He lifted a finger. Archie, someone has intruded upon my household. To pilfer from my larder is not only insolence, it is trespass. Find the agency of this violation, then attend to Mrs. Ashby's problem. There it was. 2 mysteries for the price of one. A vanished husband and a vanished breakfast. Only Wolfe could treat them with equal gravity. Mrs. Ashby rose, smoothing her skirt. You will help me, Mr. Wolfe. I will decide shortly, Wolfe said, which in translation meant yes. I escorted her to the door. She left an air of lavender and panic behind her. When I returned, Wolfe was already pouring his second beer. I said, Well, boss, it looks like we've got a howling dog, a missing husband, and a sausage thief. Want to place odds on which gets solved first? He closed his eyes. Pfui. Both will be solved, and both will reveal a common truth. Men are gluttons, for food or for power. It is always so. That was Wolfe, making philosophy out of pork links and panic. I didn't argue. After all, it was only the beginning. Mrs. Ashby's lavender and panic had hardly cleared from the front hall when Wolfe shifted in his chair, like a man condemned to endure more of humanity than was healthy. He reached for his beer, drained half the glass, and shut his eyes. That was Wolfe's method of saying the world was intolerable, but he'd tolerate it until dinner. For my part, I sat down at my desk and tapped a pencil against the blotter. So, let me sum it up. We've got a missing accountant, a howling dog that doesn't usually pipe up, and a wife convinced her husband's been swallowed by enemies she can't name. Oh, and a side order of purloined sausages. You want me to start with the pork or the husband? Wolfe opened one eye. The husband, of course. The sausages will wait. I will not. That was typical Wolfe. A missing man was a professional disruption. Sausages were only personal. He leaned forward, fingers pressing together in that steeple that meant his mind was turning over possibilities faster than he'd admit. Archie, the woman's agitation was genuine, not contrived. Her fear was not for appearances, but for substance. The howling of the dog, perhaps a coincidence, perhaps not. But her husband's routine was fixed, she said. Its rupture is significant. Sure, I said. Only I'd feel more confident chasing a sausage thief than a phantom husband with phantom enemies. At least the sausages started the day in our icebox. He grunted, which meant my wisecrack hadn't earned a laugh, but hadn't earned a lecture either. You will go with Mrs. Ashby to her husband's office. Secure those files. Names, Archie. Names. Until we have them, we grope in mist, I made a note. And what about the dog? Bah. A dog howls when the moon displeases it, or when it smells mortality. We shall see. Fritz entered then, hands wrung together like damp towels. Mr. Wolfe, I beg forgiveness. I do not understand how anyone could have entered our kitchen. I was awake. I heard nothing. Wolfe waved a dismissive hand. Attend to your work, Fritz. I'm not accusing you. The sausages are trifling compared to this case. But, and his eyes flicked to me, no intrusion in my house goes unexplained. Archie, when convenient, determine how the icebox was violated. Not now. So that was my to-do list. Fetch files, investigate enemies, and solve the great sausage caper before Wolfe ran out of patience. A full plate with no sausages on it. At 10:30, I called Mrs. Ashby to arrange the trip. Her voice was tight but grateful. We agreed to meet at her husband's office on Madison Avenue. I told Wolfe I'd be gone a couple of hours. He grunted, already half buried in orchids, which was his way of clearing me for field work. The office of Howard Ashby, certified public accountant, occupied the third floor of a brick building that smelled faintly of dust and elevator oil. Mrs. Ashby met me. In the lobby, her hat angled as before, gloves clenched in a fresh death grip. She led me upstairs with the briskness of someone forcing herself not to fall apart. Inside, the place was neat to the point of anemia. A couple of steel file cabinets, a desk polished thin, a row of ledgers stacked like soldiers on parade. The only personal touch was a photograph of Mrs. Ashby herself, looking 10 years younger and a good deal less anxious. "Here," she said, opening the top drawer of the cabinet. "His client files. I don't know which names matter. That's where I came in." I began leafing through the folders. There were maybe 20 clients in all, most of them small businesses, importers, contractors, one publishing house. All looked routine until I came across a set of notes paper-clipped to a ledger page. The handwriting was tight, almost cramped, but clear. Copler, irregular withdrawals. Investigate further. That name rang the bell. "Copler," I said aloud. "As in, your neighbor with the howling dog?" She nodded, pale. "Yes, but why would Howard have written that here? Maybe because he thought your neighbor was dipping his hand where it didn't belong. You said Howard mentioned enemies. If Copler is one, that dog of his just moved from atmosphere to evidence." She swayed slightly, caught herself on the desk. "Archie, if Howard confronted him..." I slipped the note into my pocket. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. First, we need more than one scribbled line. I'll take this to Wolfe. He'll decide what it means." As we were locking the office, a man in a grey suit appeared at the stairwell. He was broad across the shoulders, with hair that had learned to retreat but not to surrender. He stopped when he saw us, smiled thinly, and said, "Mrs. Ashby, fancy meeting you here." Her face stiffened. "Mr. Olmsted." I gave him the once-over. "Friend of the family?" "Business acquaintance," he said, eyes lingering on me a little too long. "Howard handles accounts for several firms. I was passing by, thought I'd drop in. Is he here?" Mrs. Ashby's voice was sharp. "No." And I don't have time to explain. Olmsted's smile didn't reach his eyes. Strange, isn't it? Howard is not here. Not anywhere, perhaps. People might wonder he tipped his hat and left before I could ask whom he meant. On the ride back in a cab, Mrs. Ashby sat rigid, staring at her gloves. I leaned back, watching the city shuffle by, and considered. One scribbled note about Copler, one unfriendly smile from Olmsted, and one dog howling at midnight. Add in a wife terrified of publicity, and we had the makings of trouble. When I got back to the brownstone, Wolfe was in his chair, a book open on his lap and a look on his face that said the world was still unworthy of his intellect. I dropped the note on his desk. "From Ashby's files," I said. "Your neighbor Copler made the ledger for irregular withdrawals. Might tie into why his dog was giving midnight concerts." Wolfe read the note, grunted. Interesting. And we bumped into an Olmsted character. Smiled like a man who knew where the bodies were buried and maybe helped dig the holes. Wolfe tapped the paper. "2 names, then. A beginning. Satisfactory." He leaned back, closing his eyes. "Archie, I must think. Do not disturb me." That was Wolfe's way of sending me into limbo. I headed for the kitchen where Fritz was polishing cutlery with the intensity of a man scrubbing away guilt. "Any sign of our sausage thief?" I asked. Fritz shook his head. "Nothing. It is impossible. No doors unlocked, no windows tampered, and yet they are gone. Join the club, I said. Ashby vanished too, and last I checked, he was bigger than a breakfast link. The truth was, I didn't like coincidences. A missing man, a neighbor with a howling dog, a scribbled accusation of irregular withdrawals, and sausages disappearing from Wolfe's sacred larder on the same morning. It was too neat. Maybe unrelated, maybe not, but Wolfe would string the beads together when he was ready. As for me, I poured a cup of coffee and wondered if the next knock on our door would bring a ransom note, a corpse, or another neighbor complaining about canine choruses at midnight. When Wolfe tells me not to disturb him, that's his way of saying I'm free to chase my own tail until he's ready to collect the leash. So after dropping the cobbler note on his desk and watching him shut his eyes like the world had finally grown dull enough to ignore, I went back to my own desk and did some thinking. Not deep thinking. Wolfe had a monopoly on that, but the kind that keeps a case from drifting away before you've even gotten your hooks in. We had two names, Cobbler, the neighbor with the dog that had filled midnight with operatic despair, and Olmsted, the grey-suited, broad-shouldered fellow who had appeared at Ashby's office, looking like he wanted to write the man's obituary in advance. One of them, or neither, or both, might explain where Howard Ashby had disappeared to between 9 and 11 the night before. If Wolfe was going to sit and ruminate, somebody had to poke the hornet's nest, and that somebody, as usual, was me. I left the brownstone around noon and headed uptown to West 83rd Street, where the Ashbys lived. Mrs. Ashby had given me the address in her neat, trembling script before she left, as if she expected me to arrive like a cavalry charge. The building was a respectable brick row house with a trim stoop and curtains too carefully drawn. The kind of place where people prided themselves on predictability, until one morning the husband didn't come home. I rang the bell, and a few moments later, the door was opened by a man in his 60s with skin like parchment and a stiff grey mustache. His clothes were neat enough, but his eyes were wary. "Yes," he said. "Cobbler." He nodded once. "My name's Goodwin. I work with Nero Wolfe. Your neighbor, Mrs. Ashby, asked Wolfe to look into her husband's disappearance. That makes you part of the scenery, since your dog apparently set the night to music around the same time he vanished." His mouth tightened. "My dog howls at many things. Rats, shadows, other dogs. I cannot be responsible for the coincidence." I leaned one shoulder against the frame. "Sure, coincidence. Only last night the coincidence lasted an hour, and this morning Mrs. Ashby's husband didn't return. You can see why she's rattled. What made your shepherd sing the blues?" For a second, I thought he'd shut the door in my face, but then he stepped aside with a curt wave. "Come in." The hallway smelled faintly of dog and polish. A framed photograph of a younger cobbler in uniform hung on the wall. He led me into a sitting room where a massive German shepherd lay stretched across the rug, head lifted, ears pricking at me with suspicion. "This is Rex," Cobbler said. "He is loyal. He does not howl for nothing." I crouched a little, keeping my voice level. "So what was it? Cat burglar, stray cat, or something more interesting?" Cobbler's eyes flicked to the dog, then to me. "I don't know." I was asleep, but when I rose, I saw Rex at the window, staring into the Ashby's yard, howling. Perhaps he smelled something. Perhaps someone was there. "Someone," I repeated. "Not something." He shrugged, and his mustache bristled. "I cannot be sure." I let it go for the moment. "Do you know Howard Ashby?" "Only as a neighbor. A quiet man. Too quiet. Maybe too quiet. He watches, but he does not speak. A man who knows more than he says can be dangerous." It was a peculiar line, and it sat in the room like smoke. I made a note of it and stood. "Thanks for your time, Mr. Cobbler. If Rex decides to howl again, keep track of what he's looking at. It might matter." The dog growled low in his throat as I left, as if to remind me whose house I was in. From there, I decided to look in on Mr. Olmsted. Mrs. Ashby had mentioned him only in passing, but his sudden appearance at the office felt rehearsed. A quick call from a payphone got me an address from one of my reliable sources. Olmsted ran a small importing firm down near the docks, and his office was as polished as his shoes. He looked up when I was shown in by his secretary, his smile again fixed in place like bad plaster. "Mr. Goodwin," he said smoothly. I wondered if we'd cross paths again. "You're working for Mrs. Ashby?" "Something like that," I said. "Wolfe's handling the thinking, I'm handling the walking. You said last time people might wonder about Ashby. What did you mean?" He gestured for me to sit, folding his hands over his desk. Howard was a cautious man, but cautious men sometimes uncover things they should leave alone. Numbers that don't add up. Transactions that bear too much scrutiny. He may have stumbled across something inconvenient. Like what? Something involving your firm? The smile didn't move, but his eyes hardened. Let's just say the importing business has complexities. Duties, tariffs, paperwork. One man's error is another man's opportunity. If Howard decided to make trouble, he might find himself unwelcome. "That almost sounds like a confession," I said lightly. "Not at all," Olmsted replied, leaning back. "Just a warning. If Howard Ashby has vanished, perhaps it is because he went where his curiosity led him. I let the silence stretch, then rose. If you've got nothing to hide, you won't mind if I come back with questions." "I never mind questions," he said, still smiling. "It's answers that cause difficulty." By the time I left, the afternoon light was slanting low and the city felt heavy with the promise of rain. I returned to the brownstone and found Wolfe still anchored in his chair, eyes closed, lips pursed as if he'd been conversing with Socrates in his head. I gave him the rundown. Copler's dog at the window, watching the Ashby's yard. Copler's remark about Howard being too quiet. Olmsted's suggestion that curiosity had gotten him into trouble. Wolfe listened without interruption, his eyes narrowing slightly at the mention of the ledger note I'd pocketed earlier. When I finished, he nodded once. "Good. We have begun to delineate the circle. Copler with a dog that reacts to shadows. Olmsted with motives cloaked in commerce, both connected in different ways to Ashby's disappearance. The dog's behavior is not to be dismissed. Animals often perceive what men ignore." "Sure," I said. "Only I prefer my witnesses capable of giving testimony under oath." He didn't dignify that with a response. Instead, he reached for the bell cord and gave it a tug. Fritz appeared a moment later. "Dinner?" Fritz asked hopefully. "No," Wolfe said. "A matter of trespass. Have you yet determined how the sausages were removed?" Fritz shook his head miserably. "No, sir. I've checked the kitchen top to bottom. There is no explanation." Wolfe's frown deepened. "Archie, attend to it tonight. I will not abide intrusion." So that was added to my list. Check the kitchen, trace the phantom sausage thief, and hope the trail wasn't colder than Fritz's icebox. I said as much, and Wolfe merely grunted. But then his voice changed, low and deliberate. "Archie, you will also arrange to bring both Mr. Copler and Mr. Olmsted here, separately under pretexts of your choosing. I want them in this room where I can listen. Their words, their silences, will matter. Until then, do not inform the police. This is our affair." I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms. 2 suspects, 1 howling dog, and a missing husband, and sausages. You do pick the best mornings. Wolfe closed his eyes again, his tone final. "Pui, this is not amusement. It is an inquiry, and we are only beginning. Wolfe doesn't hand out errands lightly, and when he tells me to bring 2 men into the brownstone under separate pretexts, that means the stakes are real. He might tolerate orchids and beer as his daily companions, but when it comes to outsiders darkening our red leather chairs, it's because his mind has already mapped out a board game the rest of us haven't glimpsed yet." So the next morning, after I fortified myself with Fritz's consolation breakfast, omelette instead of sausages, though he served it with an air of mourning, I got busy. My first stop was a phone call to Copler. I didn't bother with delicacy. A man who lives with a German shepherd doesn't respond to whispers. "Mr. Copler," I said, "this is Archie Goodwin. You remember me, the fellow your dog growled at. Wolfe wants to ask you a few questions. We can do it at your place. But my boss has this habit of not leaving his chair, so you'll have to come here instead. Say tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. There was a pause, then the low rumble of a man not used to being summoned. "Why should I?" "Because if you don't, I'll assume you don't want to explain what Rex was howling at in the Ashby yard. And if I assume that, the police will hear about it in less polite language. Take your pick." Another pause. Then, "Very well." Tomorrow he hung up. That was one down. The second required more finesse. I called Olmsted's office, where his secretary sounded like she polished her vowels with vinegar. She informed me Mr. Olmsted was very busy. "Sure," I said, "but let him know I'm bringing him a business opportunity. Nero Wolfe has a potential client who needs an importer with flexible accounting. Olmsted qualifies, doesn't he?" There was the faint click of skepticism through the line, then a rustle as she passed the message. A moment later, Olmsted himself came on, smooth as silk. "Mr. Goodwin. A client, you say?" "Possibly. Wolfe would prefer to speak to you himself. This evening at 8. He chuckled softly. "You drive a harder bargain than most salesmen. Very well. This evening, so that was set. 2 men, 2 times, and Wolfe's chair waiting like a judge's bench. With appointment secured, I turned to the other half of Wolfe's demand, the matter of the missing sausages. If it were up to me, I'd chalk it up to Fritz's absent-mindedness, but Wolfe didn't tolerate mysteries under his roof. I spent half the afternoon examining locks, hinges, and even the kitchen windows, which hadn't been touched in years. Nothing. Then I remembered the dumbwaiter. It led down to the basement and up to the roof. If someone had found a way in that route, they could have nabbed the sausages without stepping foot past Fritz. The basement smelled of soap, polish, and dust. The dumbwaiter's shaft creaked when I tugged the rope. No footprints, no smears, no obvious signs. But I did notice a faint grease mark along the outer edge of the panel, as if someone's hand had slipped while prying it. It wasn't proof, but it was enough to tell Wolfe later without him calling me a dunce. When I came back upstairs, Wolfe was dictating a note to himself. He finished, glanced at me and said, "Well, nothing except a greasy smudge on the dumbwaiter. My guess is someone got clever. It doesn't explain how they knew the sausages were there or why they wanted them, unless we're dealing with a thief who moonlights as a butcher. But at least it's a theory." He closed his eyes, nodded slightly. "Satisfactory. Keep it in mind. It may connect." That was Wolfe's way of hinting the sausage caper wasn't a joke, but part of a larger picture. I left him to his orchids and spent the rest of the day preparing for Olmsted's visit. At 8 sharp, the doorbell rang. I ushered Olmsted into the office, where Wolfe sat behind his desk, mountain-like in his chair. Olmsted gave a short bow as if meeting a king in disguise. "Mr. Wolfe," he said smoothly, "your reputation precedes you." "And yours, sir, is information," Wolfe replied. "Sit." Olmsted took the chair, stretching one leg elegantly, hands folded. I sat nearby, pad ready. Wolfe began without preamble. "You know Mr. Howard Ashby?" "Of course." "You knew he examined accounts, perhaps too closely." Olmsted's smile didn't shift. He was thorough. "A man like that can make enemies, even without meaning to. Enemies such as yourself?" Wolfe asked. The pause was brief, but telling. "I have no quarrel with Mr. Ashby." "Business is business, fui," Wolfe said. "You confronted Mrs. Ashby yesterday. You hinted that her husband may have gone where curiosity leads. That was not idle speculation. What did you mean?" Olmsted leaned back, eyes gleaming. If Ashby discovered things better left buried, perhaps he chose discretion. Perhaps he left of his own accord. I do not know. Wolfe regarded him in silence, letting the weight of the room press down. Finally, he said, "You are lying, but not clumsily. Mr. Goodwin will escort you out. I shall see you again, that was all." Dismissed like a schoolboy. Olmsted rose, gave a mocking bow, and left. When the door shut, I said, "That went well. You accused him of lying," he smirked, "and now we're back where we started." "Not so," Wolfe said, eyes glinting. His denial was too smooth. His knowledge of Ashby's curiosity is too precise. He knows more than he admits. Tomorrow, when we hear Mr. Copler, the pattern will sharpen. The next morning, I was ready. At 10 sharp, Copler arrived, hat in hand, his dog left behind. He looked around the office as if he expected to be frisked by the furniture. Wolfe gestured and he sat stiffly. "You own a dog named Rex," Wolfe began. "Yes. He howled last night at midnight." Staring into the Ashby's yard, Copler nodded reluctantly. "So it seems. What did he see?" I told Goodwin I don't know. A shadow, perhaps. Or a man. Wolfe's gaze sharpened. "And you disliked Ashby?" "You considered him too quiet, too observant." Copler's mouth thinned. "I said what I meant. A man who watches can be dangerous." "Dangerous to whom?" Wolfe asked softly. The silence was heavy. Copler's hands clenched, then relaxed. "Not to me, but perhaps to others." "Others, such as Mr. Olmsted?" Wolfe pressed. That got a flicker in the eyes. "Olmsted is complicated. I cannot speak for him." Wolfe leaned back, fingers steepled. "Very well. You may go." When Copler left, Wolfe finally turned to me. "There it is." Both men acknowledge Ashby's scrutiny. Both suggest danger without saying it outright, but only one had proximity last night. Only one had a dog that saw something. "Archie, we must now locate Ashby himself, or his body. The time for theory is over." I whistled low. "And how do you propose we do that?" "Knock on doors until someone coughs him up." His eyes glinted. "We shall draw him, or his captors, into the open. You will prepare. Tonight." And with that, Wolfe closed his eyes, as if the matter was settled and the rest of the world would obediently follow his plan. When Wolfe says, "tonight," it means my evening is scheduled whether I like it or not. The man has never set foot in a movie theater in his life, but he directs my hours like a producer wrangling a cast. After Copler left the brownstone, Wolfe leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing, and announced that we would flush the matter to the surface. That was the cue for me to start pacing like a bloodhound, waiting for the scent. I asked him what exactly he had in mind. Wolfe doesn't usually volunteer the full script, preferring to let me sweat through the rehearsal. But this time, he gave me enough to go on. "We shall make known," he said, "that Mrs. Ashby is in possession of certain papers of her husband's, papers dangerous to the men who wish him gone. That will provoke action. We must observe who acts and how." That was classic Wolfe. He didn't need to leave his chair. He needed me to dangle bait, and when the fish bit, he'd reel them in with words instead of nets. So I rang up Mrs. Ashby. Her voice was tight when she answered, as though every phone call might carry her husband's ghost. I explained the plan, smoothing out Wolfe's gravelly decrees into something resembling polite conversation. She hesitated, but agreed. "If it helps find Howard, I'll do it," she said. I promised her it would. Promises in this business are like umbrellas. Flimsy, often broken, but better than walking in the rain without one. The next step was arranging the bait. I typed up a neat little statement on Wolfe's letterhead, claiming that Mrs. Ashby would be delivering her husband's private ledgers to Wolfe that evening. Nothing too explicit, just enough to suggest the files contained damning evidence. I made 3 copies and dropped them like breadcrumbs where they'd be picked up. One slipped to Olmsted's secretary, one mailed special delivery to Copler's address, and one left discreetly with an acquaintance who had a knack for gossiping in the right circles. Wolfe always said New York's rumor mill was the cheapest loudspeaker in existence. By 6 o'clock, the brownstone felt like a stage set before the curtain went up. Wolfe sat in his chair with the air of a man who had rehearsed every line. Fritz hovered, unhappy about the missing sausages, but more unsettled by the idea of dangerous men possibly tramping into his kitchen. I checked the locks twice, then poured myself a coffee strong enough to peel paint. At 7:30, the doorbell rang. My pulse jumped, but it was only Mrs. Ashby, pale and composed, clutching a satchel that looked heavy with secrets, though I knew it was stuffed with blank paper. She stepped inside, eyes darting around as if expecting shadows to leap from the corners. "You're safe here," I told her. "Nobody gets past Wolfe's walls unless he permits it." She gave a wan smile. "I hope you're right." Wolfe greeted her with a slight incline of his head, like a monarch acknowledging tribute. He instructed her to sit, and she did, perching on the chair as though it might vanish. I stayed near the hall, ears cocked for trouble. It didn't take long. At 8:15, another ring. This time it was sharper, insistent. I opened the door to find Olmsted, eyes glittering, jaw set. He brushed past me without waiting, striding into the office. "Mrs. Ashby," he said smoothly, "I hear you've brought something of Howard's." "Papers, perhaps?" Her face tightened, and she glanced at Wolfe. He lifted a hand, commanding silence. "Mr. Olmsted," he said, "you arrive promptly when bait is dangled." Interesting, Olmsted's smile thinned. "If Howard's ledgers are here, they may concern my business." "I have a right to see them, rights," Wolfe murmured, "are often claimed most loudly by those who have least of them." I was about to shut the door when a shadow fell across the threshold. Copler. He stood stiffly, hat in his hand, eyes flicking from me to the office beyond. "I heard," he said, voice rough, "that papers exist. If they are given to the police, lies may spread. I will not allow it." I guided him in, keeping my face bland, though my nerves hummed. Two men circling, one woman holding her satchel like a shield, and Wolfe looming over all with his words. It was like watching a chessboard where the pieces believed they moved themselves. Wolfe let the silence draw until even the walls seemed to lean closer. Then he said, "Gentlemen, this is convenient. You arrive uninvited, but reveal yourselves nonetheless. Mrs. Ashby possesses her husband's ledgers. You both show excessive eagerness for them." "Why?" Olmsted smirked. Howard had a habit of making notes. "Notes can be misunderstood. If the wrong eyes read them, reputations could suffer." Copler scowled. Ashby pried into matters that did not concern him. He wrote lies. He watched me, watched my accounts. "I will not have his poison spread." "Pfui," Wolfe said sharply. "You betray yourselves." Ashby noted Copler's irregular withdrawals. He hinted at Olmsted's dubious importing accounts. "You are both entangled." And yet, his eyes opened fully now, dark and heavy. "You protest too much. Your fear of the ledgers outweighs your concern for the man. That, gentlemen, is telling." The room vibrated with the tension. Mrs. Ashby clutched her satchel tighter, as though the blank papers had suddenly become dynamite. I stayed close, ready to intercept if either man lunged. Wolfe's voice cut through like a blade. "Where is Howard Ashby?" Neither answered. Their silence was more damning than words. Finally, Olmsted cleared his throat. "I have no idea." "Nor I," Copler muttered. Wolfe shook his head. "Both liars. One of you knows precisely where he is. Archie, escort them out. They will not escape my net, but I do not yet choose to close it." I ushered them back into the hall, their glares bouncing off each other like knives. When the door shut behind them, I turned to Wolfe. "That was a nice performance. But unless you've got a magic trick hidden up your sleeve, we're still one missing accountant short." Wolfe exhaled, a deep rumble. "On the contrary, Archie. Their eagerness confirms the ledgers contain their undoing. Ashby's fate is bound to those pages. Tomorrow we shall have him, or proof of his murder. Tonight we have flushed the quail from cover. Mrs. Ashby sagged against the chair, relief and fear mingling. "Mr. Wolfe, please, what if Howard is already—" Wolfe cut her off gently. "Madam, despair is premature. If your husband were dead, the men would not fear his ledgers so greatly. Number. He is alive, though perhaps held against his will. And we shall retrieve him." She covered her face with her hands. I patted her shoulder, awkward but sincere. "You heard the man. When Wolfe says he'll retrieve, you can bet your hatband he'll retrieve." But even as I said it, I couldn't shake the feeling that the city outside, with its rain-slick streets and restless shadows, was keeping Ashby hidden where no dog could howl loud enough to reach. If Wolfe had been any other detective, he might have declared victory the moment both Coppola and Olmsted showed up at the brownstone, salivating for fake ledgers. But Wolfe doesn't work in declarations. He works in certainties, and until Howard Ashby was produced, dead, alive or otherwise, certainty was still locked in someone else's desk. The office was quiet after Mrs. Ashby left with her satchel of blank paper. Wolfe sat back in his chair, eyes closed, while I leaned against the doorframe, watching the night press its nose against the windows. Finally, I said, "So what's the next move, Sherlock?" "We've dangled bait, hooked 2 fish, but the catch is still swimming free." Wolfe's eyes opened a sliver. "Archie, tomorrow morning you will go to Ashby's office again. You will examine more thoroughly. There must be something he left hidden. He would not confront dangerous men without ensuring a record. Fine. Files, ledgers, wastebasket confessions. I'll hunt. But you're betting a lot on the man's sense of foresight." "I'm not betting," Wolfe said firmly. "I'm calculating. Mr. Ashby is meticulous. Men like him always leave traces." That was the final word. When Wolfe turns calculating into gospel, you don't argue. The next morning, I took a cab downtown and unlocked Ashby's office with the key his wife had slipped me. The place looked as bare as before. Desk, cabinets, and the same photograph of Mrs. Ashby smiling younger days at me from the corner. I went through the files again, more methodically this time. After an hour, my patience was running thinner than Fritz's sausages. Then I noticed the desk drawers. One of them, the bottom left, had faint scrape marks near the lock. I tugged, found resistance, then remembered the little tricks I've picked up over the years. A paperclip, a twist, and the drawer popped open with a reluctant sigh. Inside were 3 folded sheets of paper, handwritten. I smoothed them out on the desk. They were notes in Ashby's tidy hand. The first detailed discrepancies in Coppola's accounts were large withdrawals with no corresponding deposits. The second listed questionable invoices tied to Olmsted's importing firm, all stamped in red ink with check source. The third was shorter, almost hurried, both connected. Funds funneled. Must decide. Speak or stay silent. Well, that was enough to light a fuse under Wolfe's chair. I slipped the papers into my pocket, locked up the office again, and headed back uptown. When I walked into the brownstone, Wolfe was already at his desk, glaring at a book he wasn't really reading. I dropped the papers in front of him. Found under Ashby's drawer. 3 notes. Enough to make both Coppola and Olmsted sweat, maybe boil. He read them slowly, his lips tightening as if each word soured his tongue. Finally, he looked up. As I expected. He had begun to weave the pattern, but he stopped short. Why? Because someone stopped him, I said. Wolfe grunted. Not necessarily. He may have hesitated. Fear, loyalty, indecision. But if he still lives, his captors will not hold him long. Men do not restrain accountants indefinitely. Either they compel silence or enforce it permanently. That's cheerful, I said. So where do we look for the man before he becomes a corpse? Wolfe steepled his fingers. We consider logistics. Mr. Olmsted operates near the docks. Warehouses, storerooms, cellars. Mr. Copler lives adjacent to the Ashbys, with space in his basement and yard. Either location could conceal him. We must provoke a mistake. Meaning what? I sneak into their basements with a flashlight? Pfui, you would be arrested or shot. Number. We shall use the dog that got a laugh out of me. The dog? Rex, you're suggesting we hire him as a witness? Not hire, exploit. Dogs are creatures of habit. That animal howled because it sensed Ashby. If Ashby was moved nearby, the dog may howl again when prompted. We shall arrange it. I couldn't argue with the logic, though I wasn't eager to be the one standing outside a German shepherd's yard at midnight with a missing accountant possibly stuffed in the neighbor's basement. But Wolfe was fixed on it, so I spent the afternoon making quiet calls. A friend on the beat agreed to watch the block discreetly, keeping ears open for any midnight music from Rex. By evening, the plan was set. If Rex performed again, we'd know Ashby was close. If not, we'd focus on Olmsted's docks. Either way, Wolfe wanted every step reported back instantly. That night, I parked myself across from the Ashbys' house, collar up, hat low. The street was quiet except for the occasional passing cab. Around 11, lights winked out in the surrounding windows. Midnight crept up, thick and heavy. Then it came. A long, low howl, followed by another. Rex, at the window, staring into the Ashby yard, just as before. The sound raised hairs along my arms. Dogs don't howl at shadows twice. I slipped back to the brownstone and gave Wolfe the report. He leaned forward, eyes glinting. Excellent. The dog confirms proximity. Ashby is being kept near. Tomorrow, Archie, you will search discreetly. Not openly, you will use wit. Begin with Copler's basement. I raised my eyebrows. You want me to stroll into his cellar and ask if he's storing anything besides potatoes? You will find a pretext, Wolfe said. You always do. That was the end of my briefing. Wolfe shut his eyes, satisfied, leaving me to wonder how exactly I was supposed to pry into a man's basement without winding up sharing it with the missing accountant. Still, the dog's midnight testimony had narrowed the field. When I finally turned in that night, the city outside was damp with fog, and Rex's howl still rang in my ears. Whatever secret Copler and Olmsted were nursing, it was close now, close enough that even a dog couldn't ignore it. When Wolfe tells me to find a pretext, that's his polite way of saying I'm free to risk my hide while he stays home cultivating orchids and his waistline. After Rex's second midnight aria, the verdict was in. Ashby was close, and the most likely hiding place was Copler's basement. That meant I had to get in there without a crowbar or warrant, and preferably without Rex deciding my throat made a good chew toy. Next morning, I waited until Wolfe finished his breakfast. Fritz had finally located a fresh supply of sausages, though he served them as if expecting them to vanish again before reaching Wolfe's plate. And then I laid out my plan. I'll pay Copler a neighborly visit, I said. Tell him Mrs. Ashby's worried and thought Rex might sniff out her husband's trail. That gets me inside, at least to the hallway. If I'm lucky, I'll get a look at the basement. Wolfe grunted, wiping mustard from his lip. Do not rely on luck. Rely on guile. Guile's my middle name, I said, though if he'd ever seen my birth certificate, he'd know it wasn't. By 11, I was ringing Copler's bell again. He opened the door with the same wary expression, mustache bristling like a broom in need of trimming. Morning, I said brightly. Thought I'd check in about Rex. Mrs. Ashby's worried he's howling because he senses something. She wonders if maybe he caught her husband's scent around your yard. Dogs are good at that sort of thing, right? Maybe we could let him poke around a bit. Copler frowned. Rex is loyal to me. He does not search for strangers. Sure, I said, but maybe Ashby wasn't such a stranger. You said he was always watching. Maybe Rex picked up on that. Anyway, it'd ease Mrs. Ashby's mind. What do you say? A quick look in the basement, see if Rex reacts? For a moment I thought he'd slammed the door, but instead he muttered something in German under his breath and stepped aside. Very well. But only for a moment I followed him in. Rex eyed me with suspicion, but didn't growl. Copler led the way to a narrow door that opened on a set of creaking steps. The basement smelled of damp earth and old wood. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, throwing shadows longer than the truth. "See? Nothing here," Copler said flatly. I made a show of glancing around. Boxes stacked against the wall, a coal bin half full, some gardening tools. All ordinary, except for a heavy wooden chest shoved into a corner, its lid secured with a new padlock that gleamed brighter than the rest of the basement's dust. "What's in there?" I asked casually. "Tools. Spare parts." His tone was too quick, too stiff. I crouched, running a hand along the lock. "Looks new. Guess you've been shopping. Is that a crime?" "Nope," I said, standing. "But it's interesting. Mind if I take a look?" "Yes, I mind." His voice had an edge now. I knew better than to push it. Rex was watching me, muscles taut, and one wrong move would put me in traction. So I shrugged, smiled, and said, "Fair enough. Just thought I'd check. Mrs. Ashby will sleep easier knowing Rex didn't find anything down here." When we climbed back upstairs, Copler's eyes were still hard. I thanked him for his time and left, but my mind was racing. That chest, that lock, and his quick denial, it all screamed hiding, a place. Whether it contained Ashby or his papers, Wolfe would want to know. Back at the brownstone, I gave Wolfe the rundown. He listened, eyes closed, hands steepled, while I described the basement and the locked chest. "Phooey," he said finally. "He is clumsy. If he meant only to conceal papers, he could have burned them. To padlock a chest suggests something larger, more valuable, or more incriminating. You will not attempt to open it alone. That would be reckless." "Then what?" I asked. "Call Kramer and let him stomp around until the evidence evaporates?" "Not yet. We must be sure, and we must bring both men to heel simultaneously. For that, we shall require an audience here. Mrs. Ashby, Copler, Olmsted, and Inspector Kramer. Tonight, Archie, you will arrange it. Tell Kramer that I have solved his case. That will secure his presence. The others will come if they believe Mrs. Ashby intends to deliver the ledgers at last." "Great," I said. "Another performance in the Wolfe Theatre. Tickets free, suspense guaranteed." That evening I paid a visit to Olmsted's office. He looked sleek and satisfied, as though he'd digested the rumor of the ledgers, and found it tasty. "Wolfe wants you tonight," I told him. "Mrs. Ashby has decided to turn over everything. If you want your name cleared, better show up." His smile tightened, but he agreed. Copler was harder, but when I mentioned Mrs. Ashby's supposed decision, his face darkened and he muttered about lies being spread. He promised to attend. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe spent the evening in silence, sipping beer and occasionally jotting notes. Fritz hovered, uneasy, while Theodore stomped around upstairs in the plant rooms, muttering about the inconvenience of guests. I spent the time checking the locks, setting the stage, and making sure we had enough chairs. By 9, the stage was set. Mrs. Ashby sat pale but resolute, clutching her satchel again. Olmsted arrived first, smiling as if he already knew the ending. Copler came second, stiff and glaring. And right on time, Kramer barged in, hat shoved back, cigar clenched. "All right, Wolfe," he growled. "What's this about?" "You say you've solved my missing person case?" Wolfe inclined his head. "Indeed, Inspector. But I will not tell you yet. You will hear as they hear." Kramer grunted, dropped into a chair, and fixed me with a glare. This better not be another of his circus acts. I smiled. "Depends on how you like the show." Wolfe let the silence stretch until even Kramer's cigar seemed nervous. Then he said, "Gentlemen, Mrs. Ashby, the truth of Howard Ashby's disappearance lies in greed, cowardice, and a dog that howled at midnight. Tonight you will hear it." And just like that, The curtain rose. The brownstone had rarely held so much heat in the air with so little said. Everyone had filed in the night before, the wife clutching her satchel like it was stuffed with dynamite. Olmsted smooth as a cat burglar, Copler stiff and sour, and Kramer radiating suspicion thick enough to cloud the wallpaper. Wolfe had spoken enough to keep them guessing, but not enough to end the game, and that was the point. Wolfe never showed the final card until he'd stacked the whole deck. The morning after, I found him in the office with his third beer, staring at nothing. His silence wasn't unusual, but there was a pressure to it, like a storm pretending it wasn't ready to break. Finally, he said, "Archie, we advanced the matter last night, but not enough. They are wary now. They will act, and we must let them." I sat at my desk. "So we keep dangling the bait and hope one of them bites hard enough to break a tooth?" "Precisely," Wolfe said, "but it must be done carefully. Mr. Olmsted is clever, too clever. Mr. Copler is clumsy but desperate. Each suspects the other. That tension will lead to indiscretion." "Meaning one of them slips," I said. "And we're there to catch it." "Yes. Tonight you will shadow Olmsted. He will not sit idle. His business at the docks provides ample concealment for movements. If he intends to move Ashby or dispose of him, you must see it." That was Wolfe's way of saying I'd be freezing my ears off on the waterfront instead of enjoying Fritz's shad roe for dinner. I grumbled, but I knew better than to argue. By dusk, I was down at Pier 43, where Olmsted's importing firm kept an office above a warehouse that smelled of salt, tar, and the faint sweetness of coffee beans. The night was damp and cold, fog rolling in from the river. I tucked myself into the shadows across the street and waited. At 9 o'clock, a light flicked on upstairs. A figure moved behind the frosted glass. Olmsted, pacing. He was soon joined by another man I didn't recognize, tall and thin with a hat pulled low. They talked for 10 minutes, too far for me to hear, then went down into the warehouse. A truck backed up to the side door. Something heavy was loaded in. Crates, perhaps, but the effort seemed too strained for coffee beans. I followed when they pulled away, tailing the truck as it wound through the streets. They didn't go far, only to another warehouse 2 blocks over, this one older, windows boarded. They unloaded, vanished inside. The truck was left empty. I returned to the brownstone just after midnight. Wolfe was still up, orchids forgotten, the office heavy with his waiting. "Well?" he demanded. I gave him the story. "Olmsted moved something tonight, big enough to take muscle. Could have been crates, could have been a man." "My bet's the latter," Wolfe frowned. "Not likely. To move Ashby twice is to court discovery. Still, Olmsted would not risk exposure unless compelled. This indicates pressure, perhaps from Copler, perhaps from fear of the ledgers. Either way, it is telling." He brooded, lips pressed together. Then he said, "Archie, tomorrow will revisit Copler. Under some pretext, mention the warehouse, gauge his reaction. His knowledge will betray him." "Sure," I said. "I'll bring it up between coffee and small talk about Rex." Maybe he'll faint, but Wolfe wasn't finished. He leaned forward, eyes glinting. "And you will watch the brownstone tonight. I expect trespass." He was right. At 2 in the morning, while the city slept like a boxer between rounds, I caught the faintest scrape at the office window. I slipped out of bed, gun in hand, and eased into the hallway. A shadow moved across the glass. Whoever it was didn't linger, just enough to try the lock, then retreat into the night. The next morning I reported it. Wolfe nodded grimly. "As I said, someone seeks entry, likely hoping to recover the ledgers they imagine we hold. Their desperation increases. Or they wanted sausages," I said. He gave me a look that would have withered stronger men. "Archie." No levity. The day was a blur of preparation. Wolfe summoned Saul Panza quietly, instructing him to keep watch near Olmsted's office. He ordered me back to Copler, reminding me to press him about the warehouse. Fritz clucked around the kitchen like a hen guarding chicks, muttering about intruders and locks. When I arrived at Copler's again, he opened the door with less reluctance than before, but his eyes darted nervously. I chatted lightly, mentioned Rex, the weather, then slipped it in. Funny thing, I saw Olmsted down at a warehouse last night. Seemed busy, moving crates. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? His jaw clenched. Why should I? His affairs are his own. Sure, I said. Just seemed odd, him working at midnight. Thought maybe you two had a partnership. His eyes flared, just for a second. No partnership. It was enough. That flash betrayed knowledge he shouldn't have had. I stored it away, thanked him, and left. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe listened intently. Good. The chain tightens. Copler fears Olmsted, yet he cannot keep silent. We are nearly there, Archie. Nearly. He leaned back, closing his eyes, fingers steepled. Tomorrow night they will all return here. This time Inspector Kramer included, and this time they will not leave until the truth is laid bare. I didn't press him further. When Wolfe makes a promise like that, it isn't hope, it's a verdict waiting for a gavel. By the time Wolfe closed his eyes after Section 8's maneuvers, I knew I wasn't going to get a peaceful night. When he said the circle was tightening and that tomorrow night they will all return here, it meant he wanted the screws turned another notch first. Wolfe's style isn't to corner a fox and shoot. He prefers to let the beast run until it tangles itself in its own tail. My job was to keep it running in the right direction. So the next morning, over eggs and coffee, Fritz had restored sausages to the menu but served them like a man guarding crown jewels. Wolfe outlined my assignment with the precision of a general sending troops into enemy territory. Archie, Saul Panzer is watching Olmsted. You will assist him today. Observe movements, note contacts, but do not interfere. This afternoon you will also re-examine Mr. Copler's premises, but from without. There may be something we missed. 2 stakeouts in one day, I said. Do I get a medal if I don't freeze to death by dinner? Pfui, Wolfe grunted. You get knowledge, which is better. By noon I was down at the waterfront again. Saul Panzer is the kind of man who could tail a ghost and get its shoe size. So when he said Olmsted was nervous, I believed him. We sat in Saul's car across from Olmsted's importing office, sipping bad coffee from a paper cup while watching the comings and goings. At 1 o'clock, Olmsted emerged, briefcase in hand, and flagged a cab. Saul nudged me. You take him. I'll circle back if he doubles. I trailed the cab through Midtown, keeping just far enough back. Olmsted got out in front of a bank, went inside, and stayed nearly an hour. When he came out, the briefcase was heavier. He carried it like it contained bricks. He glanced around too often, that slight twitch in his neck that tells you a man knows he's being hunted. He didn't head back to the office. Instead, he slipped into a hotel lobby, the kind that rents by the week to men who don't like their names in the papers. I loitered at the newsstand, saw him meet the same thin man I'd spotted with him at the warehouse. They exchanged the briefcase. Olmsted left empty-handed. When I reported this to Wolfe in the late afternoon, he listened without moving, only the faintest quiver of his lips betraying interest. Money, Archie. Or records. He transfers them through intermediaries. He cannot risk keeping them himself. This confirms his fear of exposure. And Copler, I asked. You will see, Wolfe said. So I did. As the fog rolled in again, I took a walk past Copler's row house. The curtains were drawn, but light leaked from the basement windows. I crouched across the street, waiting. After 20 minutes, Copler emerged carrying a sack. He glanced both ways, then trudged down the block to an alley and disappeared. I followed. The alley dead-ended at a vacant lot with a few oil drums and debris. Copler stooped by one of the drums, pulled something from the sack, and set it aflame. Papers curled, blackened, turned to ash. He stayed until the fire died, then walked home, leaving only smoke. Back at the brownstone, I laid it out. Olmsted's laundering something through friends at hotels. Copler's burning papers. Looks like they're both scrambling to cover tracks. Wolfe's eyes opened. Excellent. Their desperation mounts. Mr. Ashby is their common burden. They cannot kill him yet. They need assurance that his notes are destroyed. That is why he lives, still, and that is why they will betray themselves when pressed. Kramer phoned not long after, growling that he'd heard rumors Wolfe was pulling strings again. Wolfe was polite, which meant dismissive. Tomorrow evening, Inspector. Attend. You will see the result. After dinner, Wolfe sat in silence, sipping beer while I typed notes. He finally said, Archie, their behavior today confirms it. Tomorrow, when they gather, I will press them until the truth is undeniable. You will ensure Mrs. Ashby attends and you will prepare the office. This case resolves here, not in the street. I leaned back. You're sure Ashby's alive? Yes, Wolfe said. If he were dead, they would not bother with midnight trucks, briefcases, or burning papers. They would let silence suffice. Number, he is alive, and he is near. Tomorrow, he will be brought forth. The certainty in his voice was iron. I didn't argue. Outside, the city hummed on, unaware that in a brownstone on West 35th Street, a fat man in a chair was quietly tightening a noose that would catch two desperate men and release one frightened accountant. When Wolfe said the case would resolve tomorrow, I knew the eve wouldn't pass quietly. Desperate men don't sit in their parlors, whistling while a detective strings their names together like pearls on a necklace. They lash out. And sure enough, the brownstone didn't get through the night untouched. It started just after midnight. I'd been half dozing in my room when I heard the faintest creak below. Not Fritz padding in his slippers or Wolfe adjusting his chair, but something sharper, out of rhythm. I grabbed my gun, slipped down the hall, and caught a whiff of smoke. By the time I hit the office, I saw the window ajar and a folded envelope on the floor. No intruder in sight. Just a calling card left behind. The envelope was unmarked, but the paper inside carried a neat typed message. If you want Ashby alive, destroy what you hold. Tonight. I didn't need Wolfe awake to know what that meant. They thought the ledgers, or the facsimile Wolfe let them believe existed, were still in our possession, and they were nervous enough to leave threats instead of bullets. That was both reassuring and dangerous. Reassuring because Ashby was still alive, dangerous because bluffing men are the kind most likely to kill in panic. I waited until morning to hand Wolfe the note. He read it once, placed it on the desk, and leaned back. As I predicted, their desperation mounts. Good. We shall let them come to us, or burn the place down trying, I said. Phooey, they wouldn't dare. To harm me here is to draw Kramer's wrath. They know it. He closed his eyes. Archie, today you will inform Mrs. Ashby. Tell her she must be prepared for anything this evening. She will sit with her husband's name in her mouth, but silence in her eyes. Meaning she keeps her cool no matter what. Exactly. So I paid Mrs. Ashby a visit. She looked more worn than the day before, but her eyes sparked with determination. When I handed her the note, she clutched it, then folded it carefully into her purse. So, Howard is alive, she said softly. They wouldn't bother with this if he weren't. Alive and being dangled like a carrot, I said. But Wolfe doesn't let men dangle for long. Tonight you'll be in the office when he pulls the rug out. Her chin lifted. I'll be there. When I returned, Saul Panzer was waiting in the office with Wolfe. He'd been shadowing Olmsted again and had more to report. Olmsted met with the same thin man this morning. No briefcase this time, just conversation. But the man was nervous, kept scanning the street. My bet is he's the one guarding Ashby. Wolfe nodded slowly. Reasonable. Did you follow him? Yes. He led me back toward the same warehouse. Stayed near it, came and went. He's anchored there." "That settles it," Wolfe said. "Ashby is kept in that warehouse. Copler aids with surveillance from his house. Olmsted directs the cover through his firm. The triangle is complete. Kramer arrived in the late afternoon, cigar already lit like a gun ready to fire." "Wolfe," he barked, "you'd better not be wasting my time. I had a tip that there was a note dropped here last night. I passed it over." He scowled, puffed. "So they're bluffing." "Fine. Where's Ashby?" "Patience, Inspector," Wolfe said smoothly. "Tonight, you will see." By 7, the office was arranged like a stage. Wolfe sat enthroned, the red chairs lined for guests. Mrs. Ashby clutched her satchel again, looking small but determined. Fritz hovered in the background, eyes flicking toward the door as though guarding against another sausage theft. Olmsted arrived first, smooth and smiling, though his eyes darted too much. Copler came later, stiff and sweating, his mustache trembling as though it had grown a conscience. Kramer took his seat with the air of a man who'd rather be anywhere else but was too stubborn to leave. Wolfe opened his eyes and surveyed them like a sultan reviewing prisoners. "Gentlemen, you have been summoned because the matter concludes tonight. Mr. Ashby is alive, but precariously. His survival depends on the truth. And tonight, truth will be spoken." Olmsted's smile thinned. "This is theater, Wolfe." "Yes," Wolfe agreed, "and theater reveals character." "Mr. Copler, your dog howled twice at midnight. He is an honest witness. He howled because Ashby was near. Concealed. You denied knowledge, yet you padlocked a chest in your basement and burned papers in an alley. Actions betray you." Copler shifted, jaw tight. "I did what I must." Wolfe turned his gaze on Olmsted. "And you, sir? You smuggled briefcases through intermediaries. You tried to erase your ties through money and records, and yet you came here swiftly whenever ledgers were mentioned, as though terrified they might be revealed. That is not the conduct of an innocent man." Olmsted's eyes glinted. "Suspicion, not proof." "Proof is the province of the police," Wolfe said. "My task is to expose guilt, and you have both exposed yourselves, though not fully. Tonight you will." He tapped the note on his desk. "You threaten Ashby's life if papers are not destroyed." "Very well. Inspector, the time has come to collect him." Kramer shot upright. "Where?" Wolfe closed his eyes, then opened them slowly. "The warehouse by the docks. He's there, guarded. Bring him here. I will complete the matter when he sits before us." Kramer swore under his breath, but barked to me, "Goodwin, you're coming with me." Let's see if Wolfe is bluffing. I grabbed my coat. As we headed into the night, Mrs. Ashby pressed her hands together, silent, eyes blazing with hope. Behind me, Wolfe remained motionless, the immovable mountain, knowing the world would turn his way by dawn. Kramer's Buick smelled like cigar smoke and damp leather, and the man himself was seething beside me as we barreled through the fog toward the docks. He grumbled something about Wolfe stringing him along, about me being the errand boy of a lazy whale. But I let it pass. I'd learned long ago that Kramer's anger usually grew loudest right before Wolfe proved him wrong. The warehouse loomed at the end of the pier, hulking and half-forgotten, its boarded windows and rusted doors giving it the kind of charm you associate with crime scenes. Kramer had a squad waiting, 2 men in plain clothes and a patrol car tucked behind a stack of shipping crates. We approached quietly, flashlights muted. It didn't take long. At the side door, one of the detectives pressed an ear against the wood and nodded. Movement inside. Kramer signaled the door was forced, and we poured in. The first man to react was the thin fellow I'd seen with Olmsted. He bolted for the back, but one of Kramer's men tripped him and shoved him down. Another man, unknown to me, stood by a cot in the corner, eyes wide, hands raised. And on that cot, pale but breathing, was Howard Ashby. He looked like a man pulled from a cave, clothes rumpled, hair matted, eyes blinking against the sudden light. When he saw me, he tried to sit up, croaking, "My wife. Tell her, you'll tell her yourself," I said, and cut him loose. Kramer shoved the thin man against the wall and growled, "You're coming with us." "You too," to the other guard. Then he looked at me, grudgingly. Wolfe was right. Damn him. We hustled Ashby into the car, wrapping him in a coat against the night air. By the time we got back to the brownstone, it was past midnight. The office lights blazed, Wolfe in his chair like a magistrate awaiting a verdict. Mrs. Ashby leapt up with a cry when her husband staggered in, clinging to him as though she'd never let go. Wolfe allowed the reunion its due span. 30 seconds. Before he rumbled, "Mr. Ashby, sit. You will regain your composure. Tonight your wife's courage has preserved you, but your silence endangered you." Ashby collapsed into the red leather chair, eyes hollow. I didn't know what to do. They warned me. If I spoke, if I told anyone, they would destroy you. Wolfe finished, and so by hesitation, you allowed them to attempt it. Foolish, but not irredeemable. He turned his gaze on the rest of the room. Olmsted and Copler had both been brought back by Kramer's men, each planted in a chair like reluctant schoolboys. The thin man sat under guard. Kramer stood with arms folded, cigar clenched, waiting for Wolfe to start swinging. The silence thickened until Wolfe said, "Inspector, you demand clarity. You shall have it, but first, Mr. Ashby must confirm what his notes already reveal. Mr. Ashby, you examined the accounts of Mr. Copler and Mr. Olmsted. What did you find?" Ashby licked his lips, glanced at his wife, then nodded. Discrepancies. Large sums were withdrawn from Copler's accounts, but there is no record of where they went, and invoices from Olmsted's firm, payments for shipments that never arrived. At first, I thought it was an error, but then I saw the pattern. Funds funneled from clients through false imports, laundered through Copler's holdings. Olmsted sat back, lips curling. Baseless. He scribbles notes and you call it proof. Wolfe cut him short with a wave of his hand. You will have your turn. For now, you will listen. Mr. Copler, your resentment betrayed you. You feared Ashby's watchfulness, and your dog betrayed your concealment. Twice he howled. Twice he pointed toward the yard where Ashby was hidden before being moved. Animals are honest, even when men are not. Copler's face flushed purple. Lies. The dog howled at nothing. Pooey, Wolfe snapped. The dog howled at the truth. And you burned papers in an alley, did you not? That was not nothing. Copler froze, lips tightening, eyes darting to Olmsted. Wolfe's gaze shifted. Mr. Olmsted, you attempted to distance yourself, but your actions betray you more loudly than words. You carried briefcases, shifted money, and involved accomplices. You feared the ledgers. If you had nothing to conceal, you would not have come racing at the rumor of their existence. Your eagerness betrayed you. Olmsted leaned forward, smoothness cracking, voice sharp. You accuse without evidence. Words, only words. Evidence? Wolfe rumbled. You forget where you are. This is my house, my office, and my judgment. I require only truth, and you have both supplied it, though clumsily. He turned to Kramer. Inspector, you now hold the men who abducted Howard Ashby. Their motives are as plain as greed, their methods as crude as fire and chains. They sought to silence him because he discovered their fraud. One compelled, the other concealed. Together, they conspired. That is your evidence. Kramer spat smoke, glaring at the two men. I'll take it. But Wolfe, you're not done. You always have some damn speech to tie the knot. Tomorrow, Inspector, Wolfe said. Tonight you have what you need. The guilty in your custody, the victim restored, the facts aligned. I will finish when I choose. The session broke apart with the chaos of men led away in cuffs. Mrs. Ashby weeping with relief, Kramer growling orders, and Ashby himself sagging with exhaustion. Wolfe remained motionless through it all, only his eyes alive, watching the human storm he had summoned. When the room emptied at last, Wolfe exhaled, slow and final. "Archie, tomorrow evening we will close the circle. For now, I require beer. I fetched it." He drank. And in the silence that followed, the brownstone settled, knowing the truth was in reach but not yet spoken, like the final act of a play waiting for the curtain to fall. The brownstone was quiet the next evening, the kind of quiet that presses against the ears. The city outside carried on with its clamor, but here the walls absorbed it, leaving only the steady tick of the mantel clock and the faint clink of Fritz laying silver in the dining room. Wolfe had declared that the conclusion must be staged properly, with all players present, and he'd arranged it like a conductor setting a final symphony. Kramer arrived first, grumbling, though his presence was as certain as sunrise once Wolfe summoned him. He dropped into his chair, cigar already lit, muttering, "This had better be the last act, Wolfe. I've got paperwork stacked to the ceiling." "It will be the last," Wolfe said, not looking up from his beer. "Patience." Mrs. Ashby entered next, arm linked with her husband's. Howard still looked pale from his ordeal, but the hollow terror in his eyes had been replaced with a stiff resolve. His wife's grip on him was fierce, as if she feared the walls themselves might try to take him again. Then came the suspects. Copler was marched in under guard, his mustache bristling, eyes darting with the wildness of a trapped animal. Olmsted followed, smooth again, but the cracks in his veneer showed, his smile stretched too tight, his gaze too sharp, as if gauging every possible exit. Wolfe waited until they were seated, until the silence had grown taut. Then he set down his glass and spoke. His voice filled the office, measured and heavy, each word landing like a stone dropped in a pond. "Inspector, Mr. and Mrs. Ashby, gentlemen. Tonight we bring this sordid affair to its close. A man was abducted and held in a warehouse because he uncovered what two others wished hidden. The method was crude, the motive base, but the pattern precise. It is my duty to name the guilty and the cause." He fixed his gaze on Ashby. "Mr. Ashby, you hesitated. You discovered discrepancies, Copler's unexplained withdrawals, Olmsted's falsified invoices. You saw funds funneled, clients deceived, and you wrote notes. That was both your salvation and your peril. For notes are harder to silence than men." Ashby swallowed, nodded once. Wolfe turned his eyes on Copler. "You, sir, you feared discovery. You resented Ashby's watchfulness. Your dog betrayed you by howling at midnight, twice when Ashby was concealed near your yard. You sought to hide your part by burning papers, but fire does not consume guilt. You held him first, clumsily, until Olmsted arranged for him to be moved." Copler's fists clenched on his knees. "Lies! Silence!" Wolfe thundered, and the man shrank back. Now Wolfe's eyes settled on Olmsted. "And you orchestrated. You used your firm's accounts to mask theft, invoices to cover emptiness. When Ashby saw too much, you persuaded Copler to act. You believed yourself clever enough to conceal, to distance, to let others do the dirty work. But you betrayed yourself by eagerness, rushing here at the rumor of ledgers, shifting briefcases through accomplices, showing the desperation of guilt." Olmsted's jaw tightened. "Circumstance. Speculation. Plea." Wolfe's lip curled. "It is deduction, supported by confession. Last night, in this very room, Copler spoke too hastily, saying you told him Ashby must be kept quiet. He condemned you as surely as if you had signed it. You were undone by your own ally's tongue." Kramer's eyes lit with grim satisfaction. "That's enough for me." "Both of you are finished," but Wolfe wasn't done. He leaned forward, massive hands resting on the arms of his chair. "There remains the matter of trespass. Someone entered my house. Not once, but twice. First to steal sausages, then to threaten me with a note. Such violations are intolerable. Olmsted's mouth twitched. You think I risked my neck for sausages? No. That was Cobbler Wolfe's eyes bore into him. The dog was restless, and Fritz heard nothing. Only one with keys to his own house and a habit of silence could slip so easily. You crept in to test if entry was possible, and took what you found to mask your errand. Paltry, but revealing Cobbler's face collapsed, mustache trembling. I only... Enough, Wolfe said. Your own words, your own acts, betray you both. The silence that followed was thunderous. Mrs. Ashby clutched her husband's hand, tears bright in her eyes. Howard sat straighter, as though Wolfe's words had returned something of his dignity. Kramer snapped his fingers, and his men moved in, clapping cuffs on Cobbler and Olmsted. Olmsted tried one last protest, voice sharp. This is theater, Wolfe. You have no court, no jury. I have reason, Wolfe said coldly. And reason unmasks deceit more thoroughly than juries. The men were hauled out, their voices fading down the hall. The office sagged with relief, the storm passing. Mrs. Ashby leaned toward Wolfe, her voice trembling. How can I ever thank you? Wolfe waved a hand. By convincing your husband to act with courage henceforth? Silence is cowardice. Observation without action invites ruin. Remember that. Ashby bowed his head. I will. Kramer stubbed his cigar, scowling but not without respect. Damn you, Wolfe. Every time you make me look like a fool. Wolfe closed his eyes. That is not my intent, Inspector. Only the inevitable result. Kramer grunted and left, dragging his smoke with him. The Ashbys followed, leaning on each other, their ordeal finally behind them. When the door closed, the brownstone exhaled. Fritz entered quietly with the dinner tray, braised duck, asparagus, and a bottle of Burgundy. Wolfe inhaled, satisfied, as if justice itself had sharpened his appetite. I leaned against the desk. Well, that's that. 2 crooks exposed, 1 accountant restored, and sausages avenged. What's the moral this time? Wolfe poured himself a glass of wine, his expression grave. That greed blinds men to proportion. They sought to steal, to silence, to conceal. In the end, they were betrayed by the very details they ignored. A dog's howl, a burned paper, a sausage missing. Small things, Archie. Always the small things, I grinned. Small things, big stomach. That's Wolfe for you. He ignored me, lifting his glass. Justice is seldom grand. It is a matter of restoring order, of returning men to their proper places. Tonight, it is restored. Fritz served, Wolfe ate, and the brownstone settled back into its rhythm. The storm concluded, the world outside irrelevant. Only the faint echo of Rex's midnight howl lingered in memory, a reminder that sometimes truth is carried on the simplest of sounds.